welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey. It's day 3 at CONEXPO. We have 2 interviews for you. The first one I recorded a little earlier in the week. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers put out a new economic report, and I talked to their Senior Vice President of Government and Industry Relations, Kip Eideberg. The report explained how the U.S. equipment manufacturing industry has rebounded after COVID-19 and how production is up, the manufacturing industry is supporting more jobs, and overall the indications are good. Having said that, there are geopolitical problems like the war in Ukraine, and there's supply chain issues that persist, and there's inflation. He addresses all that in the interview. Also, today I talked to Luke Powers. He's the CEO and founder of GearFlow, and his session was called The Digital Revolution for Our Productivity Crisis. He focused on how equipment for the construction industry is the biggest capital outlay you're going to have, but close behind that is when you have equipment downtime. And one of the ways to streamline that is to use digital technology to make sure that you're getting the right parts at the right time, which is complicated by the fact that no fleet has just one brand and every part is different. He also discussed how technology can help with communication, not just inside of an organization where everybody has to be on the same page, but also smoothing out inefficiencies and contacting dealers who are real sources of knowledge. So without any further ado, let's go to those 2 interviews. First, the AEM economic report, and secondly, the digital revolution for our productivity crisis. Just yesterday, Monday, you put out a report on an economic report, and some of you go into some of the details, some of the good and the bad of that report.
Yeah, happy to. And we are here at CONEXPO-CON 2023, which we think is the absolutely best location and timing to talk about the economic impact of the industry. And so our latest report, you mentioned, has both good and bad. So let's focus on the good stuff first. Good news is that the industry supports 2.3 million jobs in the United States, another 250,000 jobs in Canada, so 2.5 million jobs overall in North America. We generate about $320 billion in GDP. And overall, if you look at the industry from last year's perspective, looking back 3 years ago, when we were here at CONEXPO-CON in 2020, law has obviously changed, the world has changed, our industry has changed with it, but the big takeaway from the report is that we remain a resilient industry. So lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, but by and large, the construction and the agricultural equipment industry keeps chugging along. We're learning to do more with less, and we're just excited to be here in Las Vegas and talking about it.
Maybe you can expand on that, doing more with less, because the COVID pretty much hit everybody, but construction kept going, and in a sense, you could isolate in a cab, for instance. So there are ways you could go work around it, unlike other industries. But what were some of the ways that we're doing more with less?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so taking a step back, obviously, one of the big challenges that we faced as an industry throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of it were supply chain disruptions.
Right.
Ours is a global industry, and so equipment made in the United States, equipment made in Canada does rely on parts and components coming not just from North America, but from around the world. And so that was probably the largest challenge our industry faced, figuring out how do you source parts and components in creative ways. How do you reposition or repurpose, rather, parts and components maybe for one line of products to go into another line of products. And so what the industry learned to do was to be nimble and to be creative. Obviously, workforce was another big challenge, and it remains a challenge. Obviously, now that we're no longer in a pandemic, things have opened up a little bit more. But obviously, we cannot provide all of this great equipment that you see at CONEXPO without people to build it. And so, we talked about beginning the good and the bad. The good news is that supply chains have rebounded a bit. We're still seeing some challenges, particularly within smaller suppliers in Canada and the United States, but the global supply chains have bounced back. Now, workforce is a big challenge still for us, and obviously that is one of the reasons we picked this location to release our economic impact report, because we get to talk to many of the men and women of our industry and figuring out how can we work with them to attract more people to be part of this great industry.
And what have you heard from them in terms of what they need and how to get it?
Well, I mean, the workforce is a tricky issue. It really starts at a young age. And a lot of talk about how we need to be in the high schools talking to people about careers that they can have in our industry. I think we need to be in middle school almost, right? We need parents and we need guidance counselors, we need educators, we need friends and family to be more open to the fact that you can have a great life and a great career in this industry, building equipment. One of the things we learned from our economic impact report is that the average salary in our industry is $89,000. Now that's about 35% roughly above the national average. So these are good family sustaining jobs and careers that you can have. Now how do we get more people to be part of it? Well, we talked about where it starts. I think it starts earlier, but it also starts with our industry. We've got to do a better job of telling the story of our industry, the great jobs that you can have. Some of this amazing equipment that you see at CONEXPO-CON-AGG, well, it was built by people. And, it is not, I used to say it's not, your dad's equipment manufacturing industry anymore. It's not your grandfather's equipment industry anymore, right? I mean, this is a highly advanced, tech-forward industry. And so I think telling that story is something that we as an industry really got to do a better job of with.
I mean, I've walked through the exhibition hall. I've been here 2 hours now, and I've seen a bunch of robots. So how does automation kind of key into this as well?
Automation is key, and it's key on a number of fronts, right? I mean, it helped us throughout the pandemic to do more with less. It helped us to build the equipment in a safer, more nimble way when we were still dealing with, which was a, unprecedented, health crisis. Now, coming out of it, it helps us address some of the labor shortages that we have. Now, automation sometimes gets a bad rep. People say, well, automation will take away jobs, right? It will reduce jobs. No, it will create more jobs. Someone has to build those robotic welders. Someone has to still operate them. Someone has to oversee them. So it's just a different kind of job. So automation has helped us, again, do more with less on the manufacturing side, but it's also helping our customers do more on the job side. A lot of the equipment here at CONEXPO-CON-AGG, has, some sort of automation built into it. And so that obviously, you look at mining, for example, those massive mining trucks that operate in large mines, primarily in Canada and Australia, those can be dangerous jobs.
Yeah, it's a safety issue.
It's a safety issue, but if you have an automatic hauler operating in those mines, controlled by someone, again, still a job, who's sitting in a, somewhere, in a safe area adjacent to the mine, operating not just one, but a fleet of mining trucks, well, that helps the mining company. It creates more, I would say, more interesting jobs, certainly jobs that require, a skill set that is different, right? So we got to make sure that we do train those people, but it just overall helps the industry be safer, more efficient, and it also reduces, not necessarily that example, but there's a lot of automation right now that helps reduce our environmental impact, which is just as important.
Now, another thing that the report touched on was things you can't, like black swan events, like, for instance, a land war in Europe, which nobody saw coming except Vladimir Putin. So how do you address that kind of thing? Because that does hit supply chains, it does hit others. On the other hand, you have skilled immigrants who haven't got a job there, so can they get a job here?
Yeah, no, the geopolitical instability right now that we're seeing both in Asia with sort of increasing conflict between the United States and China, but also, to your point, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war there obviously is having an impact on supply chains. And it's also having an impact on some of our customers, their ability to do business.
They're ordering machines too.
Yeah, right,
well,
exactly.
They were anyway, yeah.
That's right. And so, yeah, it's obviously a concern. Now, what you're seeing in our industry is that there is a trend towards regionalizing supply chains, compartmentalizing supply chains. So if you are manufacturing, in Asia, you might try to reposition your supply chain so that you're only sourcing parts and components from that region. Same thing in North America. So that's a way of protecting against those disruptions. Obviously, when you have a war, it's a little bit more challenging. Yeah. But again, that's where you see a push, certainly in North America, to try to find new suppliers that are based here so that we can protect and insulate the supply chain a little bit. Now, you also touched on immigration, which is one of my favorite topics because it cuts to that workforce challenge that the industry is
Canada
facing.
Especially, we have no people.
We have no people, right? We have no people who want to build equipment. You look at our customers, we have no people who want to help harvest crops. We have no people who want to work construction. This idea, and you see it in Europe, you see it in North America, that immigrants would somehow, I'm using air quotes here for people who can't see me, steal American jobs, steal Canadian jobs. It is utter nonsense. There are not enough people in our countries to work these good paying, family sustaining jobs. So, the immigration system, certainly in the United States, is broken. I actually think that Canada could be more of a model for the United States, which has an immigration system. I'm not an expert on it, but I know just enough to be dangerous, right?
So do I, and I live there.
It's a sort of it's an employment-focused, workforce-focused immigration system. And so if there is a deficit of nurses, fabricators, you name it, the system incentivizes people with those skill sets to immigrate. And that's what we need to be looking at in this country. We need to fix the system. We need to attract more people who want to come here and work, and the ability to do so and do so legally. And not everyone wants to necessarily move here and become a U.S. citizen, and that's fine. Let's give them an opportunity to come and work for a year or two, be part of society in a legal, open, transparent way, and then return to wherever they come from. So that has been a big push for us, and you'll continue to see the Association of Equipment Manufacturers leaning into immigration reform as a way of addressing our workforce issues.
Now, we've covered a bunch of negative stuff, but from what I saw of the report, it's fairly positive. So we could go into, statistically speaking, it seems like things are on the up and up.
Yeah, things are absolutely on the up and up. I mean, output, you look at overall nominal manufacturing output for the industry grew by about 14% in 2022. You look at the overall employment growth of our industry, 4.3%, and compared to the overall employment growth for the manufacturing was 3.8. So we are outpacing, the entire manufacturing industry in terms of creating more jobs, and that's that bounce back, from the pandemic. So that's the positive. Obviously, the contributions to GDP, $316 billion, that has increased. So again, while we lost, if you look at the 2019 report, which was released in 2020, so we do this on a 3-year cycle or cadence, we probably lost about 30,000 jobs. Now, considering that we went through an unprecedented global, pandemic as well as a major recession, only losing 30,000 jobs, we see as a real positive, right? And that's again, our contributions to GDP grew, our output grew, so we did more with less, which is terrific. And again, we talked about that. 89,000 is the average salary in our industry. That has grown as well. So there's a lot of positives. There's a lot to be proud of. We look at 2023, and a lot of OEMs are telling me that they're sold out for the year. I probably shouldn't be saying that at CONEXPO-CON, but obviously I'm exaggerating a little bit. But truly, on the I know we're talking construction, on the agricultural equipment side, truly the OEMs are sold out. They're sold out for 2023, and they're sold out in the first quarter, second quarter of 2024. So demand is strong. And the same thing with the construction side. You can obviously get a paver or a hauler, or an excavator, but the OEMs are churning out equipment right now. And again, strong demand, an economy that's coming back. So I, to your point, a lot to be proud of, a lot to be optimistic of as we, head into 2023 and beyond.
Okay, and finally, if people want to take a look at the report for themselves, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to AEM.org, and it's right there on the homepage.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You did a talk today at CONEXPO about digital technology and addressing a productivity crisis. And you started with how pretty much every other part of the economy has been much more productive since, like, say, the 1960s, and construction has been less. Right. I mean, it's either a flat line or down a little bit. Maybe you could address why that is in the first place. I'm sure there's a multiplicity of reasons. You sort of focused on the parts dilemma, so maybe we'll go with that.
Yeah, so but why it is in the first place, you're asking? Yeah, I think, I think there's been, it's been hard to innovate in our space, and I think the lack of innovation has really caused processes to not change all that much when you look at other sectors. And I think because of that, it has lagged behind and unfortunately even went negative. If you look across the other sectors of the economy, those were studies based off McKinsey that we had at the beginning. And again, of course, how to address that and how to pull the entire trend line up. I believe the future is an orchestra of technology that, there's no one silver bullet to get there, but we have to increase our output dramatically to get to where we need to go. over the next few decades, and that's what we talked about today, is how we can help in software.
One of the bottlenecks you pointed out was with parts for equipment. Well, first of all, you said that equipment is a huge capital outlay, but then the equipment downtime is just as big an outlay, or as near to it anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's a big unseen cost. I think we all viscerally understand as contractors that equipment costs are our biggest capital outlays, like you said. But what is unseen is maybe the amount of equipment we need to have on hand, because some are more reliable than others. Maybe it is all these delays that we have that we don't quite fully appreciate, and a lot of those fires end up at our fleet team that maybe us as business owners or management don't quite see. That can have a dramatic effect on our profitability, which in the industry is 5.5% on a job site. So what we talked about today was, if you look at 10 hours in a day, if you have 9 of those hours are incredibly productive, but one of them is not so much or not at all, on that day you'd be actually in the red because of the industry average of 5.5% margin, which, by the way, my thesis is that I think because of all that drain in productivity, that has a drain on our profitability.
And one of the things you pointed out was that this is not Amazon. In order to paper towels, well, all paper towels are more or less the same. This is not the same, because you've got a multiplicity. In a fleet, you might have a whole bunch of different brands of equipment, and they all have different parts.
Right.
And that's one of the bottlenecks, and maybe you could talk about how digital addresses that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
If it does.
That's exactly right. We as fleet owners and operators, we need access to expertise. And who has that? Those are our partners, those are our dealers, and those are the people supplying us the equipment. We trust them to be there for our business and to help us keep those machines running, so we don't run into those those delays we were talking about in downtime. However, we by nature need to run a mixed fleet. So we do multiple things on a job site, so therefore we've got a mixed fleet. So the level of complexity from our partners can become a little exponential, especially when we talk about communication nodes, right? So making that seamless and making that easy and bringing software into our actual business processes of how we need to use them today and can use them is very different than paper towels, to your point. It's it should be specific to our use case, which we believe why that we really haven't seen a big change in productivity output today, is because we're lacking in the software there.
And you also point out that the amount of communication that's involved, whether it's email or a phone tree or whatever, that adds to it. That all adds up too, even though it may not feel like it. Cumulatively, it does.
100%. Waiting on hold, getting passed around, having to call multiple different partners, sitting on hold. All of that is done by either business owners or their team, and their team can be doing and should be doing higher level work. Mechanics should be repairing machines. Fleet managers should be focused on the fleet. These mundane tasks that we almost take for granted as a consumer, we feel the pains very deeply in our work because they're the same as it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's a lot of the same processes.
And you also point out that the amount of complexity, even just internally, if you've got a company, let's say 20, 30 people, they've all got to be on the same page at the same time, and that in and of itself is difficult.
That's right. I think the importance of being simple and everyone looking at the same information on, let's say the same order is so critical. There's so many emails flying and texts flying and calls flying that just keeping everybody on the same page is a big win in and of itself. And like we talked about in the presentation, the nodes of communication and people involved, the more you add, it doesn't add another one line of communication. It gets actually exponential between all the parties involved. And in our space, we think about the field team, everybody involved at the field, from the equipment owner to the foreman, to the team at the let's say the shop or the office, and then out to my dealer partners, right? They're all their nodes of communication. Trying to simplify that, trying to get that in one place. Digital tools are actually a great benefit to us.
And so what are some of these digital tools? I assume Gearflow is one of them, but what's the landscape?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a lot of underlying software. There's a lot of infrastructure and digital tools that are being used, which is a multitude of technologies that are used for the consumer space. Too long for me to mention, but I would say that probably the biggest technological innovation that I think has really yet to dramatically transform the industry is how can our smartphones make us 10x better than what we are today. There's no lack of connectivity. It is how do we?
It's almost too much. Frankly.
How do we simplify it? How do we get everybody on the same page and create a solution that that what GearFlow tries to do? We try to create a solution to keep everybody on the same page, drive better access to their dealers they work with and partners they rely on for their parts, streamline communication internally and externally, and provide that visibility. But yeah, I guess I would just harken back, Warren, to my original point that I think that how we get from a declining productivity in the industry to accelerating our productivity is an orchestra of tech needed on the job site and at the dealer and OEM level.
And you mentioned during your talk that you were here in CONEXPO 2020, literally a day or two later, lockdown happened.
Yeah.
But you also point out that kind of accelerated forward people adopting digital tools that were already there. They just weren't being used as much. But this kind of was the juice that made it go, essentially.
That's exactly right. I think now, I think it's all eyes wide open. I think there was a lot of status quo, and our expectations as consumers rose dramatically in COVID. I think we wanted to continue to improve our lives, and we did so through ordering online. But we cannot do that for our fleet still. It is still a very manual process, and it requires a lot of different tabs, and still 7 to 8 orders, or you're calling your dealer. It's just, so I think our level of expectations has risen, and the great exciting news is, to our earlier point, the infrastructure's there. The actual infrastructure being used in B2C, it's all great. There's a lot of great technology that we can leverage, but it's how to leverage, and most importantly, to whom.
Right.
Those experts at the dealer who I rely on to help me run my fleet, I want better access to them. We aren't solving in parts, frankly, a parts price problem. We're solving a downtime problem, which has way bigger economics and implications to our product, to our profitability, which is a really exciting thing, right? We would love easier ways to buy our parts.
And you also pointed out at the end that there is hope. You cited a study that said this is where things are going and it's getting better.
Yeah, I think, and that was from AED in 2022. Right. That was a McKinsey study, and dealers get it. I think dealers are starting to understand an omni-channel approach would be great for customers, right? I think it's just innate to us to understand that as professionals, right? And that's what's exciting is we believe this is two sides of the same coin. I've talked a lot about today, and I've talked a lot about right here how it works for contractors, but for those contractors having to make those calls and spend all that time on repetitive tasks, guess who has to answer those calls on the parts counter?
Yeah, exactly.
Guess who has to spend a lot of time updating with mundane tasks and everything? It is very much two sides of the same coin, and I think dealers know that, because the more efficient they can be, and they don't have to give these mundane updates on tracking, et cetera, and price and availability, all that good stuff. The better their business will be. So that's what's exciting.
And finally, if people want to know more about GearFlow or see your presentation or just ask you questions about this, where should they go?
Yeah, so go to GearFlow. It's gearflow.com. Our booth, if you're in, I don't know if people are listening to this on the show.
It's coming out today, so they could be tomorrow.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're in the North Hall. We're at N12929, right under the N2900 sign. We've got fresh cookies and coffee, which has been a head turner, which is great. But other than that, I'm Luke at gearflow.com. The website's obviously gearflow.com, and I'd love to connect with anybody at the show or after.
Okay, great. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks so much, Warren.
I hope you enjoyed both those interviews. We've also got day 1 and day 2 of ConExpo and the Construction Record Podcast. And coming up tomorrow, we have a few more interviews for you to enjoy. Also, make sure to check out our special on Takeoff Boost, Construct Connect's new technology, on Tuesday. You can listen to us on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, and the Journal of Commerce and Daily Commercial News websites. Thanks.